Nicholas Herbert Stern è uno dei più importanti economisti a livello mondiale. Il suo nome è legato al celebre rapporto Stern, che nel 2006 per la prima volta ha documentato per conto del governo britannico il rapporto tra il cambiamento climatico e tutto il complesso delle scelte, delle azioni, delle intenzioni dell'economia. Lord Stern ha ricevuto all'Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore di Milano la laurea honoris causa in scienze bancarie, finanziarie e assicurative. E in questa occasione è nostro ospite e gli faremo alcune domande sul suo lavoro e sul destino dell'economia, il destino dell'ambiente, il destino di tutti noi. Welcome. Lord Stern, as everything changes, usually you have to change your mind. But in economy and in economics, it seems rather difficult. A lot of people still think that it may be dirty, it may be polluting, it may be at all, but it is how it works. Why it is so difficult to change the economic mind?
I think you're right that the economics profession, particularly the academic economics profession, is quite conservative. They've learnt their trade and they have ways of proving quality through the standard journals. And they train according to these principles the next generation. Often that kind of conservatism is no bad thing. But, and it's a big but, the world has changed. And we now have a very clear understanding from the science of the immense risks from climate change. We're heading for something close to 3 degrees centigrade temperature increase. That's average global surface temperature relative to the 19th century. We haven't been there as a planet for around 3 million years. Homo sapiens is 300,000, 1/10 of that old, way outside human experience. Sea levels, for example, were 10 to 20 meters higher than now. And if you think of how much of the global population lives near coast, that's huge. It would involve populations moving hundreds of millions, probably billions. And of course, those that did not move would be even worse off probably than those who did move. And that would involve conflict, likely on a major scale, and you could not turn off the reasons for the conflict. Now that's just one illustration, just one of the risks that we run. We're near tipping points in terms of the potential collapse of the Amazon forest, in terms of melting of or thawing of the methane, thawing of the permafrost, releasing methane. The Antarctic ice sheets, the land ice sheets could slide off and you get very quick increase in sea level. So these are the kinds of dangers that we face. That is not normal in terms of the way economies have grown over the last several decades, say since the Second World War. It would completely disrupt what we could do, completely disrupt where we could live, overturn lives and livelihoods, loss of life on a massive scale. This isn't some minor problem that we can adjust to. This would completely change who we were, where we could live, what we could do, how we could produce. So we now should be clear that we have to change very quickly. So our economics should be about how to change very quickly. And when we look at that, we realize that we're changing not simply to avoid danger, of course we are, but also to find a new way of producing and consuming, which is actually more attractive, more efficient, cities where you can move without the air pollution that kills so many people around the world. It'll be a much better way of doing things, more productive. It'll be a growth story. So the economic change that we see has to start from the science and the huge risks that we face. And once you recognize that our economics has to be about rapid change and how you can foster, manage that rapid change. And that's a very exciting subject in economics. So economics should embrace it as architects have embraced how you go to net zero. They've got a new lease of life. So too have engineers. You know, the people who do agriculture are seeing, my goodness, there's a huge life in our subject because we can see now what we have to do. And economics should be the same.
But an interesting point of your work is also that with a clean way of economy happens to be also cheaper than the dirty way of economics.
If you look across the emissions, now probably 30% of the emissions are in places where the clean is cheaper than the dirty, even without carbon price or subsidy. Most of electricity generation, the clean is cheaper than the dirty. That's becoming true in transport. Now you can make an electric car with half the number of people that you can make the internal combustion engine vehicle. They last longer, they're cheaper to run, and they're cheaper to service. So in electricity, and really almost now in transport, it'll be very soon, the clean is cheaper than the dirty. So this is growth which is there because of efficiency, but it's also on energy, for example, but it's also growth that's there in terms of lower cost for much of what we do. The challenge, of course, will be to make the clean cheaper than the dirty across a still bigger range. But I think we're not so far away with steel, maybe 10 years away, 5-10 years away with steel, particularly if we develop green hydrogen quickly. Perhaps a little longer in terms of aviation and shipping fuels. But progress in those areas is very powerful too. So for much of the economy 10 years from now, perhaps 2/3, the clean will be cheaper than the dirty. But we have to act now to make that happen. It does not happen without investment. It does not happen without innovation, research and development. So we can see our agenda in terms of policy, in terms of investment, in terms of innovation, and we can and should move very quickly.
I think that a core keyword of your vision is cooperation. Cooperation between climate sciences and economics, between rich countries and less rich country, and between public investors and private investors. This is very interesting, and in a way it seems to me that it brings economics back to its origin of moral science, almost in humanities more than in hard sciences.
Well, I think bringing the ethical and social dimension into economic activity, decision-making and policy is analytically hard. Yeah? It's not somehow the subject going soft, it's actually the subject needing an extra dose of quality analysis. And you cannot consider climate change without considering justice between generations. You cannot consider climate change without thinking about justice between countries. It's poor people who get hit earliest and hardest, and it's poor people who've done the least to create the problem. So you have to start with the ethics, because that tells you what you should be doing. If you don't care about future generations, you would not act on climate change. But I hope that's not the argument. If it is, it should be challenged from the point of view of the ethical position that it embodies, and it would crumble because it's an untenable ethical position. So then the question becomes, if you do worry about future generations, how do you act? And then you discover that if you do collaborate, you can actually create something that's much better for this generation than what we were doing before. And it does involve stronger communities. You know, you can't have public transport without community action. You can't have combined heating and power without community action. Reusing, recycling, the circular economy requires community action. The financial flows that are necessary to finance the investment that we have to have in emerging markets and developing economies requires cooperation between rich and poor countries. But if we do it, we will do it largely through our international institutions, the biggest part of the public flows from rich to poor countries should be, and I think will be, through the multilateral development banks, the international institutions. And that will be a reaffirmation of internationalism, which costs the rich countries almost nothing. It means expanding the borrowing power of those institutions because they can borrow very cheaply and so they can on-lend very cheaply. So that is a form of collaboration which, of course, should be driven by the results, which is the financing of the investment we need. But the process itself of international collaboration makes for a better world.
Speaking of ethics, in your report, the Stern report, is often linked to Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si as two pillars of. What do you think about the role of religions in this change of mentality, in this change of behavior, change of attitude?
I think religious leaders are enormously important because a lot of this is about ethics. A lot of it is about the technicalities of how we do this change, which is economics and politics and sociology. But the motivation, the realization that we have to make these changes is driven in part from the ethics. And there it's quite right that religious leaders should speak up. They don't have a monopoly, of course, of ethics, but they have a very strong contribution to play in ethical discussion. And Pope Francis's leadership has been absolutely outstanding. And it's more than the position he has taken, which is, of course, fundamental importance in Laudato Si. But it is also the way he communicates. And it's extraordinary. You know, simple statement like, if we destroy creation, creation will destroy us. It's very short and it's very clear. And everyone can see what he means, yeah? You know, another one, I'm not sure I get it exactly right, but he said, you know, God always forgives, people sometimes forgive, but nature never forgives. So you can, those statements, the simplicity and directness of those statements is enormously important. So it comes from ethics, it comes, in this case, from a real talent to communicate, but it also is important in terms of trust. And of course, religious leaders are not fully trusted, but they're more trusted than politicians and economists. And that trust, I think, is enormously important too. So his leadership has been outstanding, and we should recognize that other religious leaders too, Hindus and Muslims and Jews and other parts of Christianity, the leadership has been pretty good actually in amongst religious leaders, and it's a very important part of the story.
Last question. As far as Karen understands, you have a fresh vision towards the new generation. In fact, the new generation is aware of the dangers, is asking for answer, and I think of just also a generation of young scholars that is making the difference in this topic. And can we spend the word hope for a new generation?
Yes, that new generation has been taught about climate change at school. So our 18, 19, 20-year-olds coming to our universities understand the issues. And for them, the physics is basically obvious because they've studied it, they've understood it, and of course the evidence is overwhelming. So they carry that with them, but they've moved forward, and not simply they're saying, you, the older generation, have presented a very bad heritage for us. Your legacy is worrying and damaging and dangerous. They say that, and they're right. But they go much beyond that. They know what to do. Yeah? They can see ways of doing things differently, and they know already that those ways of doing things differently can be very attractive, for the reasons that we discussed. And in cities where you can move and breathe, and ecosystems which are robust and fruitful, and resources which are used much more productively and efficiently, and all those things they understand and they're very clear on. And they can see what you have to do, and they can see that things that they can do in their own lives. So now, my generation had defined benefit pensions, which means you get some fraction of your last salary. Now, of course, people have defined contribution pensions, which means that they have to pay in, and those things are invested, and then they get whatever comes out at the other end when they retire. So they want those pensions to go, their own investments, to go into the technologies of the 21st century, not the dirty, dangerous, risky technologies of the last. So they see an economic and a moral set of criteria around their investments. They're concerned about what they eat, they're concerned about how they travel, how they heat their homes, and they're concerned about where they work. And of course, the good students have a choice, and they don't want to work for firms which they see as irresponsible. So the more responsible firms get the better people. And that's very powerful too, because if you want good people, if you want to make a profit, if you want to be well positioned for the future, you want the best young people working for you. So you should behave responsibly because it's right to behave responsibly, but actually you should behave responsibly if you want to secure your position in the future marketplaces. So in all these ways, the young are active. So they're explaining and developing solutions, they're pushing politically, which is vital, but also they're doing things themselves, and they do give me hope.
Thank you so much. I hope to see you back soon in Università Cattolica, and congratulations for your work, and thank you especially for this last word of hope.
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you.